So what was the background for Europen actually?
Well, the background from Europen was a group of people who actually were involved with Inkpen in the United Kingdom and saw the fact that in the late 1980s that eventually packaging legislation was going to come from Brussels. We already saw the developments taking place in Germany with the Topfer Decree, which was the beginning of the producer responsibility obligations. And so we decided we needed a kind of a cross-sectorial organization based here in Brussels to look after the interests of the packaging value chain. So we founded it in 1990. We also found that there was an organization in the Netherlands called SVM, Stichting Verpakking Milieu, I think it was, which had similar ideas. And so the initial seeding came from those two organizations. And we formed it in 1990. We officially didn't get registered as a organization until about 1991 in Belgium, and we opened the office here in Belgium, in Brussels, in January of 1993.
Mm-hmm. What does Europen actually stand for?
It's EUR is Europe, and the O is organization, European organization, and P is for packaging, and EN is for environment. Europen, European Organization for Packaging and the Environment.
How many members do you have today?
Around about 40, and our members come from manufacturers of packaging materials, converters of those materials that make the packaging, and the users of packaging, the big brand owners, global brand owners, that mostly in the fast-moving consumer goods sector. Mm-hmm. And we also have a membership for a capacity or a category for what we call national bodies, and where there are national organizations with similar goals as Europen, then they're eligible to affiliate as well. Mm-hmm. And there's a few of those. But the important thing about Europen is that it is the only organization that brings around one table all the different sectors in the packaging value chain. Mm-hmm. Unlike other trade associations which might be specialized in one particular type of packaging, or on food and drink, or on toiletry and cosmetics and so on.
Mm-hmm. But you are only working with packaging from an environmental point of view then?
Yes.
You're single, how should I say?
Single focus.
Single focus,
yeah.
Yes, that's right.
That's correct. And indeed, the 1994 EU Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive is really the, you might say, the fundamentals of our existence of our organization, and we need to remind ourselves. People seem to forget or never knew, because it happened quite a long time ago, that this directive has twin objectives. First of all, by the way, it is not an environmental directive. It was adopted under the legal basis of an internal market directive. And the twin objectives are, yes, environment, that we need to take care of packaging's impact on the environment and reduce that as much as possible. But also we need to have an approximation or harmonization of the national regulations about packaging, so that there's no barriers to the free movement of goods across borders. And that was why it was brought up under the internal market. So a lot of Europen's work revolves around issues related to the internal market objectives. The most celebrated case, of course, was the well-known ban in Denmark on using beverage cans, which was a legally allowed piece of packaging and was forbidden in Denmark. And so that went all the way to the European Court of Justice. And we've seen other cases where a national government suddenly just tries to introduce a regulation which would say, oh, wait a moment, that would be an obstacle to the free movement of goods, free movement of packaged goods across borders. So we go to the European Commission, and hopefully we can convince the Commission to tell the member state, sorry, you can't do that.
So you're actually sort of a lobby organization.
Yeah.
Do the Commission listen to you?
Yes, fortunately, I guess we've grown up over the years to be really recognized as the voice of industry on packaging and environment issues in Europe. I stress that we're the voice only on packaging and environment issues. We don't speak on other issues related to packaging, but certainly when the European Commission wants to get a view of industry on those issues, they turn to Europen. For example, the other day I there's a high-level conference coming up in the coming weeks in Brussels, being organised by the European Commission. In fact, as a follow-up on the work already started on addressing the issue of marine litter, and particularly plastics in the marine litter waste. And of course the plastics industry are there, but Europen is invited as the representative of the industry. And likewise with the food sustainable consumption and production roundtable, the Commission wanted someone sitting at the table to speak for packaging, so Europen is the one that gets invited, yes.
But when you work in a lobby organization like this, it must be very difficult to point on certain achievements, and this is because of us and see and so, or do you have examples, or am I right?
Yes, there are some examples of some achievements, but of course in the end, when you succeed in changing a law or steering a law in a more industry-friendly direction than what was originally proposed, clearly other partners in the supply chain and other organizations get involved in that, and we do try wherever possible to bring those other organizations to work with us on issues. I mean, I guess one of the most recent, well, fairly recent cases of that would have been the 2004 revision of the 1994 Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. What started out to be a simple twigging of the targets for recovery and recycling of packaging and fine-tuning of one or two other pieces of the directive, once it got into the hands of the European Parliament and the rapporteur responsible for that, suddenly blew up into a major issue about prevention, and the idea that this individual had about some kind of it was called PEI, Packaging Environmental Indicator, and there was a lot of support for this idea, and we looked at that and said, this is something we clearly don't need, and not only that, it won't work. And so Europen was more or less single-handedly responsible for defeating that issue in the Parliament. It went all the way to a plenary vote, and we managed to win the day on that one. So that's one example of some successes we've had. There are others which don't go to that point, because the secret of good lobbying, of course, is to see these things coming at an early stage, and the rule of thumb is that the earlier you're able to intervene or to get involved and start talking to the people who have the idea, the better the chances of preventing it or getting it to move in the direction that would be most effective for the environment and most effective for industry. Once the train starts leaving the station, it gets harder and harder to slow it down.
Can you say something about how the European Commission looks at packaging? Do they actually know anything about packaging in the organization, or is it sensitive to discuss? I don't know.
No, it's not sensitive. I mean, there is a person sitting in DG Environment, the Environment Directorate of the Commission, who has responsible for the dossier packaging, which is really the Directive 94/62 as revised in 2004, and all of the other things that have been tagged onto that. And in a broader sense, that falls under the wider scope of the waste issue in DG Environment. There's also people over in the Industry and Trade Directorate, and also in the Internal Market Directorate, who have issues and have responsibilities regarding the internal market objective. Well, Europen has contact with those officials. We know who they are. Those officials change from time to time. In recent years, they've changed more often than we would have liked. But to come back to your original question, is there anybody that knows anything about packaging? Well, I would say they know a lot about packaging regulation, and they have their own ideas, and they have the broader framework of what is the Commission's philosophy and policy on waste, which is driving their thinking and their development of ideas and regulations. But as far as people that understand the function of packaging and understand the real purpose of packaging and the service it provides, regretfully, I don't think those kind of people exist in the bureaucracy. We can go to them and we can explain that to them, and we often do that, and then they're I have to say, in defense of those people, they're very professional, and they're always ready to listen and to learn from but you've got to do it, and then you find that a year later the official that you had briefed on packaging is suddenly moved to another job in the Commission, and you've got to go through that whole process again. So it's a continuous process.
So there is actually a need for information also to people in the Commission, as it is to people in ordinary life.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, the people in the Commission, and also who are bureaucrats, and their political masters, who are politicians, are always beholden to what they perceive as being public opinion. They want to be responsive to public opinion. We often talk about political leaders, but politicians, in my view, are not leaders, they're followers. They follow what the public is saying and so forth. And so public opinion and perception, and we have a saying, of course, very often, perception is reality. How people perceive what the perceptions people have about packaging is the reality that we have to live with and work with. And people essentially still to this day don't see and understand the real purpose of packaging. And they only see it as some kind of waste that ends up on their kitchen table they have to do something with, yes. And so forth. And it's a problem. And they're very quick to say there's too much of it, and to think that, well, why shouldn't everything be refillable, and so on, and why do we have to have all this stuff? And they only look at the primary packaging, and they have very often little understanding of the secondary or the transport packaging that's behind the whole system.
I heard someone, was it on the Environmental Commission, that said something about that the excess packaging should be taxed?
Well, that was actually our Commissioner for Climate Change from Denmark, who made a speech in Hong Kong a few months ago talking about means of reducing carbon emissions, and talked about the use. She was giving a few examples of the use of fiscal incentives or economic instruments, and one of those, the favorite of all politicians, is taxes, and she even suggested that putting a tax on excessive packaging would be probably a good idea, because then we would save the world and we'd have less carbon emissions. And this is the kind of thing, unfortunately, it's sad, because here's a Commission official, hard-working, well-meaning, with a job, an important job to do, and doesn't understand, just a classic example of not understanding, in fact, the role of packaging in preventing waste, and the role of packaging in reducing waste of far greater resources than the little amount of resources that are used in a piece of packaging.
And is there really a definition on excessive packaging? Can you say what excessive packaging is?
Well,
I mean, would it be possible to have a tax like that?
It's a difficult one to measure, but I mean, there are the essential requirements which say that you only use as much packaging as necessary to protect the good and to ensure the safety and hygiene in the delivery, and to satisfy the market and the consumer. And if you can show, and if the regulator could show that a product, that the amount of packaging used on a product is more than is necessary to do all of those things, and that consumers could be quite happy to have it with less packaging, then I think they've got a case that it is excessive packaging. And then that company should be told that. It doesn't mean that they necessarily need to be fined. The idea of the essential requirements is not as a penalty. It's rather to say, look, this is not working, let's change it, let's work together. That the authorities should be working in a partnership with the industry in making those kinds of changes. And there have been a couple of examples. I mean, the country that's probably done the most job, in an EU point of view, often plays by the rules, is the UK, and they've established a pretty good system, also with the help of industry in monitoring compliance. And there have been a few cases where the officials have gone to the company and said, look, we think there's too much packaging, and it was agreed, and they managed to make a change in it. So it can be done. But you need officials that understand the task and that are prepared to work. They shouldn't be thinking of it in terms of working in an adversarial role, them against us, but it should be we're working together. And that should be the spirit in which it should be. And certainly Europen has done a lot to try to encourage officials to do that, but there's always this feeling of suspicion when industry says they want to help. I guess it's maybe the reverse of how industry reacts when somebody from the government comes along and says, oh, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
We often hear today that there is too much packaging on the market, and at the same time we have those problems with food losses and so on. So what is your view of this? Do we have too much packaging on the market in total, or should we try to reduce packaging, or should we maybe have more packaging?
Well, I think the first thing that people need to be reminded of, and I always say it when I'm talking to officials, is that the companies that are members of Europen, big multinational famous brands and so on, I can assure you they don't spend one dime, 1 cent, 1 euro cent more on their packaging than they need to do all of the things that the packaging has to do for them. And that of course includes selling the product. They're conscious of costs all the way through the supply chain because they're in a very competitive business. So the market itself is the biggest driver in terms of packaging reduction, I believe. Mm-hmm. They're also conscious of the opinion of their customers about it, and they're working to do that and to achieve reductions in packaging. And it's been an ongoing process, not just in the past few years, since suddenly sustainability became the buzzword, because before we had sustainable packaging, we had environmentally friendly packaging. We couldn't define either of them, but we're busy using the term. So those companies are not using more packaging that's necessary, I don't believe. And as far as the cost of packaging, and also we have to move not just in terms of the monetary sense, but also in the resources that go into it. Packaging is there to protect the product. And a spoiled product, and whether we're talking about pieces of processed food, or we're talking about a flat screen television set that's made in China or Korea or somewhere, if that product is spoiled and wasted and thrown away as a result, the losses are 10 times or sometimes 50 times greater than the cost of a little bit of extra packaging. So I think that's the message we need to get across to people. So I don't see that there's a great deal of excess packaging. Whenever I meet an official who talks about excess packaging, the first thing I always say, give me an example. Mm-hmm. And when they start thinking and giving the examples, I can explain to them why it's packaged the way it is. And then they say, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
That's right. So this discussion about the food losses is an excellent opportunity for packaging industry to really tell ordinary people that what packaging can do.
Yes, I think it is a terrific opportunity, one which is a gift to the packaging industry, and one which I urge all those involved, no matter what part of the packaging value chain they're in, to embrace. And it's not just important for companies that are in the food and beverage sector, because if we can succeed in changing people's attitudes or opening their eyes to the value of packaging and the importance of packaging for food and beverage, then there has to be a knock-on effect for other products, whether it's a household cleaning product or a computer or something else, the value of packaging. So yes, it is an increasingly important issue. We're constantly hearing about the prospect of the growing population and the demand for food and rising food prices. And let's not forget, part of the reason what's driving this increasing demand for food is because the prosperity of the globe, despite the current economic woes we're suffering through, is growing, particularly in the developing world and in Asia. And people are wanting to live better and consume more and better food and so on. So it's one's leading the other. And if we're not careful, in my remarks that I gave at the Safe Food Congress back at Interpack this year, I pointed out that really with packaging we could probably, if we just properly use the packaging that exists today, we could feed the world today with properly with all of the food that's already being produced, without producing any more food. We just prevented the waste of what we're throwing away, both in the developing world and in our world, because we throw away so much of it in the developed world as well.
So you have today 40 members,
yep.
40 intelligent companies who knows what it's all about.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you have much more members actually? I mean, if you look at what you're doing,
yes.
I mean, it's a small amount of companies that are really working for packaging.
Yeah, they're companies with vision, and they're companies who have a sense of social responsibility and are prepared to be among those who are seen as leaders on these issues. Unfortunately, there are companies out there. Obviously, if somebody would look at our membership list and see who's there, they will very quickly see who's not there and who should be there.
There is a lot of free riders, sort of.
Well, that's a term you would use. I wouldn't use it that way, but perhaps there are companies that haven't been convinced of the benefits of joining together and working together for these things. But if we could double our membership, we could double the amount of money that we would have to do this work, and and carry the message. I mean, it's amazing the number of companies that come to us that aren't members and are looking for free information and so on, and so we have to deal with that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.